Tonight's review is on a film called Insidious Chapter 3, which is a prequel to the first two Insidious movies, in which Elise has pretty much decided to go into retirement. She's done with the business of communicating with the other side because of how dangerous it is. But then this teenage girl comes to her house asking for help, and of course, at first, Elise says no to her, but then once she realizes how much danger this girl is really in, she ultimately decides to summon up the courage to help her and save her life. Now, I'm a big fan of the first two Insidious movies. In fact, I know that I'm in the minority on this, but I thought that the second film was even better than the first in some ways. And when I initially heard that the third movie was being handled by a different director, I was kind of hesitant to watch it, but then once I heard such good buzz and found out that it was getting positive reviews, I decided to go ahead and watch it. First of all, I like the way that they did the family in this movie. They kind of changed up the dynamic here. Whereas in the first two films you had Mommy of the Year and Daddy of the Year material, in this film you just have a father who comes off as a straight up asshole at the beginning of the film. He's not like outright abusive or anything, but you can very much tell that this is a broken home ever since the death of the mother. Also, this movie gets pretty creative when it comes to its scares. It feels like Leigh Whannell was really trying to put his own stamp on this trilogy, and I think it pays off pretty well. Instead of just doing what James Wan did by having people run around in this white face paint, he actually came up with some pretty bizarre creature effects for some of the spirits in this movie. And to top it off, one thing that makes the story itself a little more intense is the fact that the main character is bound to a wheelchair and is therefore a lot more vulnerable. The ghost in this movie, the main villain who Elise is trying to get rid of, is pretty cool too. He's almost like one of those people in real life who's just completely miserable and hates his life, and so he wants to make everyone else just as miserable as he is. Only in this case, he's doing it from the afterlife and to a much greater extent. However, for me, the best part about this movie was getting to know more about the character of Elise. I mean, to begin with, Lynn Shay, I think, is a great actress, very underrated. I mostly know her from the 2001 Maniacs movies, and yeah, she's just a very emotional character in this movie. And I liked how I got to know a little more about her backstory and her motivations for what she does. And I liked seeing how Elise first met up with the characters of Tucker and Specs. And this is yet another thing I know I'm in the minority on. A lot of people don't like Tucker and Specs because they're essentially the comic relief of the trilogy, but I honestly love them. I think they're very funny, and when they made their first appearance in Insidious, I thought it was a really interesting choice to kind of add levity after all of these horrifying moments before, the final showdown occurred. By the way, on a quick side note, I know that I've criticized a couple of horror movies in the past for using jump scares, which I didn't find necessary. In case anyone is wondering at this point, the main thing that sets the Insidious movies apart is that whenever they're making you jump, the threat is real in these movies. There's something really happening that will make that jump stick in your mind and make it a much more intense experience. When the jump comes from some kind of fake out thing like some guy sneaking up on a person or some object falling or of course a cat jumping out of the closet, then there's no intensity to it and it doesn't really stick in your memory as much. Now, throughout the majority of the running time of Insidious Chapter 3, I was expecting this to be almost a masterpiece. I was feeling like this was a much better film than the first two chapters of Insidious, but Then the final act happened, and that's where it started to fall apart for me. First of all, I don't want to spoil too much here, but there's basically a showdown during the final act of the film, which had me laughing out loud due to how stupid it was. And then I had another audible reaction during the final shot of the film. It was basically, since this is a prequel, the very ending, right before the credits, was trying to tie this in with the first movie. It felt extremely forced, and it just made me sit there and go, really? Granted, I know a lot of people found the final act of the first Insidious to be pretty silly as well, but I was okay with that final act. I do understand the criticisms that it's gotten, but the fact that I found this movie's ending to be a lot sillier should tell you something. In the end, I don't think Insidious Chapter 3 is a bad movie. I do genuinely admire some of the choices that Leigh Whannell made with this, and if you're a fan of the first two Insidious films, then you should enjoy this one. By the way, I decided to start doing outros for these reviews with a rating out of 10 for the films that I'm talking about, as well as a general consensus on what I thought of the films. So here's my first outro. I hope you enjoy it, and as always, I hope y'all have a good one.